Okay, great. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the MIT Mobility Forum organized by the MIT Mobility Initiative. Today, I'm really excited to have Professor Kai Axhausen joining us. Actually, today is the last session of the Mobility Forum in fall 2024. I'm so glad that I have Professor Axhausen to conclude this season's discussion there. In the conversation we had prepared the forum, we've been discussing the following, that planning as a discipline, or transportation planning more specifically, over the years, we've been very good at criticizing. We identify a whole set of problems, issues in the society we're facing. But where are the positive vision that we can offer? So I'm really excited to have Professor Axhausen to offer an alternative vision into the future. So hopefully people can enjoy this session. And as I want to reinforce the norm of this forum, which is everyone contribute one idea. In the chat, please type in one comment or one question to Professor Axhausen on this. Particularly if you have a bold vision for transportation planning should look like, please again offer it into the chat, and then we can trigger more discussion in that. Right. So let me introduce Professor Kai Axhausen is a professor of transportation planning in the Department of Civil, Environmental, and Geomech Engineering at ETH Zurich. His research focused on the measurement and the modeling of travel behavior in the past 35 years, contributing significantly to the literature on stated preferences, micro-simulation of travel behavior, valuation of travel time is component, parking behavior, accessibility impact, and behavior measurement in general. A plethora of area that contributed really substantively. And I actually look at the Google Scholar, he's actually the most cited scholar in the transport planning, more than 47,000 of citation there. And he's the editor-in-chief of transportation, one major journal in the field, and also serve on the editorial board of Transportation Research Part A and Travel Behavior and Society. Without further ado, let me pass the forum to Professor Axhausen. Kai, please.
Thanks a lot, and I'm very honored to be the last one this term. And I do hope that I can fulfill the great billing you have given me. I think some of you might have seen some of the things I will say today, but I tried to add a new idea at the very end. If I may have the shared screen.
Yeah. Can you...
Is that me or is that...
Yeah, can you share? It's from your side, if you can share.
From my side, yeah. That's okay.
Yeah, can you share that?
Here we go.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Yeah. So the question I'm asking myself is, what do we do when business as usual doesn't work anymore? And I would claim that in spite of everything else, most societies work on business as usual, just continuing what they have done in the hope that it will continue to work. And the question is, will it? And that's what I want to ask today. Because as all of you know, effectively, we have surpassed the 1.5 degree increase over pre-industrial times, more or less this year and last year. And the question then arises, will we and can we just continue as before? Can we just, for every problem, just build and build and build? And I'm asking this question and trying to answer it, or at least offer a possibility, but just for the urban areas, because in the laziness, we haven't, the project which I will report about, we haven't had the chance to look at suburbia. And we are very aware that suburbia is probably the much greater challenge than the urban areas. Now, if we look at business as usual, I think the problem we have, or the glory, is that infrastructure expansion is still the first solution any planner or any politician will go for, because we have by now a dedicated income stream which makes sure that the budgets are there to build or to maintain. And that puts up enormous pressure organizationally. And in addition, because we have very few ideas for alternatives, infrastructure expansion is the obvious solution. Now, clearly, we are also working very, very hard at operational improvements and automation, but that solution is the second one, and it's driven by obviously the great advances we are currently making. And one thing which is obvious is that the demand management is generally excluded from the discussion. In some countries, you're not allowed to raise the word road pricing in the ministries because it's a no-no. And if we look at how long it has taken for Manhattan, which is the obvious case for congestion pricing, to get not quite there, but at least they are now making the attempt to do it. So what do we do now? How can we advance? And let me go one step back and ask, what is the dilemma we are trying to solve or trying to address? The dilemma is that we have been strikingly successful. If you look at this map, it is Switzerland, but distorted so that the distances are now travel time. This is Switzerland in 1950, and this is Switzerland today. The same scale. If you look at that, you see that Switzerland successfully shrunk itself by a factor of 2. And it did that on purpose because they knew, and we knew, the positive impacts that will have on many fronts. I'll talk about that in a second. So, and I'm sure if you were to do the same calculations for all the industrialized countries, you would see the same types of shrinking factors. And I think it's this success which gets places like China and India to invest billions into their motorways. So what do we get for the money? We do know now from dozens of studies that improving accessibility, which we get from the shrinking, improves productivity on the economic side. And the elasticities are relatively high at the beginning of the process, and they're getting smaller, but they are still continue. We did an exercise in Switzerland, and we still show that even with our very developed road system, we still get productivity gains for further accessibility. And then, which has been less documented, but I would argue from first principles, these shrinking countries improve the social capital we have because we are closer to each other and can meet each other more often. And that adds to our social and virtual interactions by physical interactions. As nice as it is to talk here, I think it would be much nicer to see you all in person. Now, the downside of that, and which we are now realizing hard, is that these high accessibilities produce increases in car ownership, because clearly when this road system is there, people will want to buy cars. It increases transport demand in its own imputed and induced demand. And with it, as long as we still have combustion engine cars, produces greenhouse gas emissions. And because generally we are responding faster with the demand than we do with the roads, it produces congestion. Then, in addition, which is a new effect, it encourages working from home. And with working from home comes less public transport use. And in particular, comes less commitment to public transport in the form of season tickets where it's available. And finally, it invites sprawl. And all the literature shows that these effects are ongoing. Now, in Switzerland, we have passed a law which wants to control sprawl, and we are still building roads. That's not the same thing. Working from home is, on the one hand, encouraged, but we have firms which now want to have their people back. And clearly, greenhouse gas emissions is nothing we want to encourage. So that's the dilemma. We get good things in terms of accessibility, and we get bad things. And now we don't see a solution of how to work with that. Now, why do I talk about the visions? I think that the transport policy, and large extent also spatial planning, is being driven by a couple of visions which were developed in the 1920s and 30s. A time of crisis where various people thought about what else can we do, in particular because at that time the urban was in crisis as well. Let me show you a couple of these. I think probably you have all seen these pictures of Le Corbusier's City Radieuse. He hated the city and he wanted to destroy it by providing towers in the park with motorways connecting them, and in this particular case, providing little airports between the towers. And no, we have never built this exactly, but if you go to Singapore, if you go to China, if you go to some of the things which were built in the 50s and 60s, this was built in a scaled down version. And that's something which still comes up in the mind of the planners and the politicians. The second vision, which was also extremely successful, was sprawl, or Frank Lloyd Wright, Usonia. The idea that world would be perfect if every household had a quarter acre, a car, and a house. And this has been built with abandon. And I still think that most of the public would like to live in this environment. One thing which you note when you look a bit closer are the many roads he suggested to connect these people from their suburban houses to work. And again, this is still the vision which people are asking for. Finally, further vision is this. These are images of motorways from the 1930s and 40s. That's a 1930s picture of a German motorway. And I still believe when planners and politicians ask for more roads, they imagine that the world would look like that, empty, sunny, and beautiful. We do know that motorways rarely look like that, but still, that image is what drives us. It's not the reality, it's that image, that vision. And I think we don't have an alternative. And then there's one more which comes up again and again, which is Colin Buchanan's presentation of how central London could be rebuilt to be fit for the car. I'm not sure if everybody knows Buchanan's work. Buchanan and his team were asked in the early 60s to provide a vision for the reconstruction of English and British cities to answer to the challenges of the car. One thing which often gets forgotten is that the team was not allowed to look at road pricing because there was a second commission working at the same time under Reuben Smead, a professor at UCL, who looked at road pricing. Smead's report is mostly forgotten or maybe known to specialists, but Buchanan's work is still very much in the mind because his work got published by Penguin in mass paperbacks. And for that reason, you can buy it quite cheaply by Amazon and other secondhand book dealers. And I highly recommend that you do. It's a beautiful book and a beautiful visions. But I have to say, I'm happy that Tottenham Court Road was not rebuilt in this way. But the idea is still there. We solve the problems by providing more capacity. Okay. Now, these visions are still with us, but they're not really they're discussed in the background. But transport planners and engineers are thinking about how can we address the issues today? And I'll talk about two of them in a bit more detail. And one is pricing. If you ask any planner, any economist, he will say, we have problems because the use of the roads are not properly priced, in particular, not the externalities. If you were to allow a transport planning dictator, he would probably come up with a pricing system of that type. He would say, the users have to pay for the option that the road is there. They have to pay for the usage and the damage they cause. Then they have to pay for congestion pricing so that congestion doesn't even arise. They have to have dynamic responsive parking pricing so that you don't get parking surge. They have to pay for greenhouse gases. And finally, for any other externalities and emissions they make. This is a beautiful vision, but one which is electoral poison. And in the cases in the cities where congestion pricing has been implemented, it was either a government which was so safely in its position that it could impose it, like in Singapore, or it could be kind of like more like a freak, like David Livingston, who got it on in an election in which he was the obvious candidate. And elsewhere, this put on as often to get more money for road construction. And so if this is essentially electoral poison, what else can we do? One thing which is obviously suggested very intensely is mobility as a service. The idea that if we were to integrate all the shared mobility from taxis, from pool taxis to buses to trains seamlessly, so that the user wouldn't really have any troubles, that the system would work great, and that there would be no delays, no city person pulling the emergency brake in the peak hour, like happened to me this afternoon. That would be great, wouldn't it? And it is. Unfortunately, we did some calculations and some model estimation, and we showed that even if you were to give all users a free season ticket, the cost, the generalized cost, would only match the costs of the cars, generalized cost of cars. So on average, you would at best expect a 50-50 market split. Clearly, central London is different, or central Manhattan, but overall for the country as a whole. So that might not be enough. So we need more. We did a couple of back of the envelope calculations, and we are happy to be corrected. But our impression is that if you look at the greenhouse gas emissions, if you look at today, which is the black bar, we are well above the red bar, which is the target for Switzerland. Yes, with today's electric cars and improved electric cars, we get substantial improvements, and we would be below the target. But unfortunately, we would get induced demand because of population increases, of induced demand because electric vehicles are cheaper to operate than today's cars. And we get another boost of an induced demand due to autonomous driving, which is coming. So we are still above the target. And that makes the sole hope on a technology fix difficult, because the technology fix is probably not able to deliver. So we need others. And as I said, we haven't really looked at suburbia, or never mind the rural parts of the world. But we looked at the urban areas and thought, what else could there be? What else could we do? And one idea we had, or we have, and pursuing, is to say the e-bikes, the modern e-bikes, are amazing things because they are as fast as a car in an urban area. When you look at numbers for the speed of traffic in urban areas, you get numbers between 5 and 15 kilometers an hour, either due to congestion or due to traffic control. We did measurements in Zurich, and that's 15 kilometers an hour for cars in Zurich. And an e-bike is easily that fast. So why not think the city and city traffic as driven by the e-bike? And yes, there are many issues for an e-bike, but still, let's think about it. And that's what the current project is doing. We are thinking about how could we convert a city that is not driven by the car anymore, but is driven by the e-bike. And let me show you a video which we have produced. Let's hope it works. Yes.
Climate change may be the greatest challenge of the 21st century. In Switzerland, transportation produces 41% of CO2 emissions from energy combustion, which is more than in the USA and across the European Union. Traffic jams are commonplace, and by 2050, populations in Swiss cities should grow by another 30%. Traffic simulations by researchers at ETH Zurich show that there is a solution to increase the capacity of streets and reduce emissions. Reallocating more street space for sustainable modes can improve safety, efficiency, access, and sustainability in a way that everyone's mobility needs are met. Decarbonizing transportation while improving the freedom of travel requires integration of micromobility and public transportation. By transforming streets, we can strengthen public transportation and micromobility and provide safer and more attractive spaces for pedestrians. Emergency and delivery vehicles, as well as mobility vans and tradespeople, will have access to all buildings through a parking reservation system. Better access to wider, separated bike lanes will increase safety and convenience for all ages and abilities. Children could enjoy cycling to school safely. Increased bike parking and more publicly shared micromobility would provide last-mile connections for commuters and visitors. More space designated for micromobility means people would benefit from less crashes, reduced stress, and improved health and well-being. Based on research, redesigning streets is a quick and cost-effective solution that would work if implemented. People can regain autonomy and enjoy the freedom of movement without owning a car. By combining public transport and micromobility, we occupy less street space and make the city more livable for everyone while achieving emissions goals for transportation.
Here you have the barcode, QR code to take you to the website and all the papers we have written so far and all the papers which will continue to be produced in this project. And okay, these are the people who funded us. So that's okay. Let me continue. So what is the idea of the e-bike city? The e-bike city, as I said, takes the e-bike as the start in conjunction with the shared modes, because we are well aware that we continue to need shared modes. We just started not optimizing it in any form and argued, let's take 50% of the road space for the slow vehicles, so that 50% is still there for the cars and vehicles to reach every address in the city, because clearly the fire brigade, the police, the emergency services need to go to those buildings. The integration of the shared services has to be done because we still have to move large groups and large numbers, and there is variation in demand, so we still need them. And finally, and that is the tricky bit, we are hoping to show that we can maintain the current accessibility levels. And that's why it's a research program and not a design study, because we are currently working on simulating and modeling an e-bike city to show how high the accessibilities are when we have redesigned the cities. And that, in this area, we are happy for others to collaborate with us, to bring up other examples, so that we get out of the tiny little bubble of Zurich, because in the end, Zurich is tiny, with 400,000 people and 1.5 million in the metro area. We haven't talking about a big city. So this is one side of what I want to talk about. Let's go back to my point about business as usual. Business as usual is driven by the hope that we can get rid of congestion, although we all know that congestion will reappear a year or 2 or 3 later. And it's also still driven by the knowledge that we can improve accessibility with it. And because societies want that increased accessibility, in particular in countries where it is currently low. The issue now is further accessibility growth really a policy target which we should pursue? And if so, how? And it's interesting, and I think you might not have heard about it, that the Swiss voted down a proposal to add new lanes to 6 pieces of motorway in the country. It was a package of about 4.9 billion Swiss francs of investment, which had to go through a referendum, and it was voted down. So the Swiss feel maybe accessibility growth isn't really the target anymore. At least 51% of the voters felt that way. So do we want and think about, let's stop? Let's say, at least for countries like Switzerland and similarly developed countries, that we take the current accessibility map. This is the map for Switzerland. It was part of a project where we calculated it as the status quo and try to maintain it. When I say maintain it, that means that there is still room for further road construction or public transport construction, given that we have population growth and therefore further congestion. But that we pledge ourselves to say, let's just maintain the current status. And that's politically would be enormously challenging because we don't like this. We don't like limits. We don't like constraints. But it would at least make sure, and that's my argument, that the current residents would not be worse off if change happens. And in the Swiss discussion, we have the challenge that the country still expects 1 million more residents, another 10% in addition. And without further expansion, this leads to deterioration of the accessibility. But the pledge we would make to ourselves is, yes, we will maintain our accessibility, but not increase it. And that can happen because we do have more residents and more employment possibilities, and we have it by reducing generalized cost where suitable and in suitable ways. We could start to make trade-offs between the modes and argue we can't and shouldn't build both public transport infrastructure as well as road infrastructure, which has been the Swiss way and has been the way wherever public transport is credible competition for the roads. We would improve infrastructures where possible and needed. We would do operational improvements, but we would pledge ourselves and say no further step changes, not this dramatic increase, which I showed at the beginning. We wouldn't shrink the country any further. And with that, I'm looking forward to being criticized for these silly ideas in the discussion which is coming up. If you want to know more about the projects and the work, these are the sources and the websites where you find the papers and the documentation. With that, I'm looking forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Axhausen there. Again, let me encourage people to type your thoughts and comments, your criticism, your excitement into the chat, right? So we'll hopefully keep most of the time for the conversation with audience, right? So maybe I'll start from a few questions from my side. First on the e-bike side, right? You said the goal is to have for 50% road space allocated to the slow mode, right? Yes. First of all, what's the current percentage? And also secondly, between current and the future, how far are we from that vision?
I think at the moment, if I remember it right, Zurich has about 13-14% of the road space is allocated to cycling infrastructure. The city is expanding it, and that's the same in all other Swiss cities and most of European cities. But they're starting from a slow base. And if we do this incrementally, one bike path at a time, it's going to take forever. And it's also a problem because politically, doing it incrementally exposes it to the vote every time something is done. And public mood changes, and maybe 3 years it gets approved, and then 2 years it doesn't. And I do think one reason why the voters are changing their minds is because there is no vision of what it will achieve in the end, at least. I would hope that that's the reason.
I see. Yeah, one thing, maybe a particular detail on the weather's impact, right? Both Zurich and Boston, I live, in terms of cycling, the winter summer has such a swing here, right? So that's where the case where demand fluctuated a lot, but infrastructure cannot, right? We can. How do you think can the infrastructure be flexible to this?
I think if you look at current behavior of cyclists, you will see that depending on country, the demand fluctuations are there, but they are not as vast as people who sit in cars imagine, or in buses. It's between 15 to 20% between winter and summer. Now, this is mostly European data where the swings aren't as violent as, let's say, in Canada or in Southeast Asia. That's one thing. So the swings aren't as large as you would think. And B, it's also to some extent practice and experience. There is the kind of the joke, and there was one paper who formulated this and said, the Germans get annoyed and don't cycle, the Dutch just wear better clothing. And I think that's obviously a pretty arrogant position to take. And it would clearly, we would need to see how the population and all the others grow into this.
Right. Yeah. Another point is if you look at the corresponding industry there of a different mode, right? If you look at car, there's a gigantic global industry behind this, right?
Yes.
You look at cycling, there is some, but much, much weaker. If you look at pedestrians, there's just no corresponding industry there, right? So how do we cultivate this support for e-bike from not only the planners, but the broader set of social forces there?
That's a good point. But what I see is that in cities, certainly in Europe, in the core cities, there is a pretty strong support for cycling as one policy to make the cities more livable and more exciting and interesting. And as I said before, we hadn't looked at suburbia, where the bicycle is not really as pushed as hard, where most people use the car as their essential mobility tool. And that's where the real challenge comes. And we would have to see and look at solutions of how we can allow the suburbanized to travel into the city, and maybe how we can improve cycling in suburbia. And there definitely will be parts of a country where cycling is not an option, and we will need to continue to use cars, and we'll need to continue to use buses and others to provide accessibility and the services they need.
I see. Thank you. So the second set of questions is about accessibility as a measurement and potentially policy goal as a debate. The first one to understand how much accessibility as a metric is being used by the decision makers in the Switzerland context.
And in the Swiss context, we do cost-benefit analysis for all the projects, both public transport and road, and they use the usual indicators you would expect. Accessibility as such is not monetized or discussed in the materials which the policymakers get, and definitely not the citizens which vote upon them. Accessibility is mentioned in some higher level policy papers, but again, it's not monetized or discussed as a target. It becomes more of a general term, like we want to improve accessibility or access, and therefore we need. But it's not really converted into numbers and then discussed as such.
I see. Yeah. Do you want this to be changed? And yeah,
I think yes. That would be my suggestion, that this gives us a chance to talk about this, what we want from the transport system and how good it should be. Because the better the accessibility levels, that tells you that the system is better. The disadvantage of accessibility are well known, because the Hansen-style numbers, or worse in terms of public communication, a log sum term of a destination mode choice model, are abstract and extremely difficult to discuss and present. For that reason, in most cases, simpler versions of these numbers are used. Let's say, like David Levinson's lab at Minneapolis, calculating the number of people reachable from any location. Yes, but still, I think it is a potential way of discussing policy, which is coherent.
Right. Yeah. That reminds me, actually, the first session of this season is on 15-minute cities, right? I think you were there making, and both Robert Sauer make the comment, one important contribution of the 15-minute city is the communication contribution. Is let the layperson, the mayors actually understand the concept without understanding the specific mathematics there.
Yes. But the 15-minute city has this hands-on feel. And that makes it such a successful idea. The accessibility, I think, will remain an expert discussion in the main. And for that reason, it is a hard sell. But I still think that for the planners and for the consultants which advise the ministry or the experts in the ministries, they can do the discussion at that level. And then the translation of the decisions which come from that would have to be taken into hand by others to communicate them.
Right. Good. Thanks. Maybe last set of question from me, I'll give it to Buon for the Q&A from the audience. It's about the beginning. We mentioned this in the 30s and 20s, we had a few these important thinkers offer these radical visions, right? Of course, this radical vision has a lot of criticism. Some think this vision, if achieved, have a lot of bad consequences. That's one aspect. The other aspect, people say, is these things are just a utopia, right? We're never going to be feasible. The two contrasting assessment, those visions we're thinking at that time. What's your response to that?
I think clearly, I would hope at least, that neither Frank Lloyd Wright nor Le Corbusier thought that he will get it built this way. But still, these visions drove policy, because certainly Le Corbusier and then obviously the Charter of Athens became guiding tool of the discussion in post-war world. And certainly suburbia was picked up. It didn't need to pick up. Suburbia was already there, but he provided an overarching what could be achieved. And they provided the arguments why these types of cities are solutions. And I think it's this background images which are essential, because these are the visions, these images which people have in mind when they think about and discuss and argue. They don't think about, I don't know, some American multi-story suburb. That's not the image they have in mind. They have these positive and sunny and nice images at the back of their mind, just like they have this image of the empty, sunny motorway in their mind.
Right. Yeah, indeed. So maybe the exact form is not being adopted, but this style of thinking, this particular component are very much embedded in many of the reality there.
Yeah, that's what I would argue. Clearly, I haven't done the empirical studies and asked all the policymakers and planners, but given what we are doing, I think it's in the back of their mind.
Right. Yeah. And then transfer to today, we mentioned that. Then think, how can the today it's a new generation of planners have these bold visions forward here, right? Or maybe there seems a lot of competing visions where mostly offered by technologists, right? From automated settings, electrified settings. What do you think of either planning education or planning field can encourage this type of thing?
I think clearly we want to make progress. I think nobody just wants to administer the status quo. I think that's a very hard sell. And for that reason, these new solutions are very appealing. But clearly, at least as I followed the discussion both of electric vehicles, but even more so for automated vehicle, it has become clear that they have limitations and they will produce problems. And in that sense, academics should develop further visions because the policymakers have no time for this. So we might want to use the liberty we have as academics to discuss and produce these visions. And then obviously see them torn apart and criticized outside of our bubbles. But I still think we need to produce ideas to move forward, because just continuing as is gets us nowhere, or it just gets us not far, put it this way.
Right. Thank you. So let's see how the audience respond to the particular. Go on.
Yeah, thank you, Genoa. Thank you, Dr. Axhausen, for the fascinating talk. A lot of questions and a lot of discussion on the weather, especially. I just wanted to point out that today it was like -4 degrees Celsius as I biked to campus this morning. And Stephen Zoff mentioned there's no bad weather, there's just inadequate clothing. So I just want to point out that here are my gloves, here are my earmuffs, and my big jacket that I use, and it was fine. I mean, I understand that, but, I've lived in, there's a researcher who's working in New Delhi. And you mentioned India and China as two of your examples where they're investing billions on motorways. Could that be spent in different ways? So I've personally lived in Delhi for 5 years, and I never biked there because it was too hot in the summer. I mean, like 6 months of the year, and it gets very polluted in the winter. And I'm not even getting into the infrastructure, safety aspects of things. Yeah. And a point Mehul made was that motorcycles are like $500 in India for a 4-stroke motorcycle, and an e-bike would probably be $200, $300. So it's very similar. So, and it's much more convenient and alternative. So how do you make the e-bike a realistic option in these developing countries then, where the weather is not so conducive and you have cheaper options?
Okay, the motorcycle is obviously a competitor. It's clear, but the motorcycles are both heavier, potentially more dangerous, and polluting. Clearly, okay, you could say you can have an electric motorcycle, and if you look at what the Chinese call e-bikes, they're essentially like Vespas or small motorcycles anyway, and that is really the main electric bike I saw there on the roads, but only as a visitor, so I can't speak to all of the country. So the e-bike will take away a lot of the sweating in the summer because it supports you with power. And in the winter, I hope more people are as proactive as you are with the kit. So I think that those are the things I can say. Now, India and China are obviously enormous challenges because the cities are not also very large, and the distances might be large. And then the question arises, are those really distances you would want to travel on a bike? Having said that, if we do it, we would hope that a lot of the cars, and with them, a lot of the pollution disappears. And that in both countries, they would invest into all the other sources of emissions and reduce them as well. So maybe in 5-10 years, the air isn't as polluted anymore, so that doesn't become a hurdle anymore for outdoor activity, either walking or cycling.
That's the hope. So you mentioned, on one of your slides where you showed the emissions from cars, I'm moving from ICE to EVs of 2050, and because of the induced demand and the population growth, we're pretty much back to square one. So David Ruth had a question, and I'm wondering if in your transportation modeling work, what would be the impact on emissions if people actually carpooled, especially during rush hour, when we have the single occupancy vehicles on the road occupying space and emitting a lot of CO2?
Carpooling would make a contribution, no doubt. I'm just doubtful whether it will ever become a mass mode, because given all we know, people seem to be strangely reluctant to carpool. Yes, there are exceptions, but it isn't really a prime alternative if people think about it. And this is really strange, and I haven't really seen literature or lots of work on it. Why are people kind of happy to sit in a bus, but are so reluctant to carpool. And I don't fully understand why. And I think this would be very interesting work to do, because carpooling is a reasonable and an important mode.
Yeah. I mean, just today morning on the issue of, people liking their space, the number of Waymo robotaxi rides in San Francisco has crossed Lyft.
Okay.
So 200,000 rides per week, and that's more than what Lyft is doing. So, people really like not having to, make small talk with the driver, having their own space, do work calls, whatever have you.
Okay.
So it was just staggering that today the numbers came out for last month. Waymo did more rides than Lyft, which is a big TNC operator in the US.
Okay, I hadn't seen that. Very, very important. Yes.
Yeah, something for us to just mull about, right, when we think about people and their choices.
Yeah.
So I think Amir Brudner, who's like a transportation research scientist, his question was, one issue with transportation capacity is that it changes in discrete steps rather than being continuous. How can this be accounted for in your models? For example, maintaining the status quo is almost impossible because each step causes a shift in the equilibrium.
Okay, that's a fair point. In the work, 2 PhD students at the EVT in Zurich did work on the total capacity of urban areas. If you look, it's a paper by Loder, Ambul, Monica Menendez, and myself. And there we showed that the capacity of urban network, kind of 5-10 square kilometer of urban networks, is defined by the intersection density, by the lane miles, by the amount of buses driving, and traffic control, and the topology of the network. So yes, you're right that capacity for each and every link grows in steps. But if you look at the whole network, you probably get a nearly smooth increase of capacity through, if you look at the total capacity, the macroscopic fundamental diagram. So that is what I think we can do there. And that's would be my argument, that we need to do intelligent work, and there's a lot of optimization work to do to see how we can place these additions then at the right places in the right networks.
Thank you. I'd like to touch upon accessibility because you mentioned, keeping accessibility the same for all, as it was before. So there were some comments in the chat that mentioned that the key is increasing accessibility and sustainable transport modes to encourage this mode share. But there was another person who pointed out that, people who require mobility devices and maybe for some reason cannot use a bike or an e-bike, won't they be penalized for something they cannot control and end up paying more to get around a place where they would pay much less?
Yeah, I think I would argue that the accessibility would be defined as a multimodal product, because some of you probably have read Ben Akiva and Lerman's book on choice modeling, and there he introduces the concept of accessibility as a log-sum term of a destination choice model based on a mode choice model. And in this mode choice model, you have all modes represented. So you can start thinking about how to shift between the modes to maintain the overall level, because accessibility integrates all of these modes. And we haven't done that yet. So it would be really important work to do how we balance it. And then clearly we can look at the shift between non-motorized modes or small vehicles. And then we can also look how to maintain the accessibility for the handicapped and their needs. And for example, then have suitable public transport options so that they can travel.
On the topic of mode choice, I just wanted to, look at the socio-economic dimension as well. So Anne had a question that even in Switzerland, cars are still probably used to flag socio-economic status, large SUVs, Range Rovers, for those with high status, and small sedans for the middle class, and e-bikes for the environmentally conscious folks. So how do we address that? I know it's not exactly what the paper is addressing, but it's a big question that we'll get asked.
I think she's perfectly right that the vehicles have a status component. And in Switzerland in particular, the fleet is over-motorized and way too heavy, which reflects just that Switzerland is a very rich place. And that addresses probably a wider question of how we change the status symbols, because this consumption aspect is everywhere. It's in the big houses we build and live in, which are way larger than we need, in our wardrobes, and everywhere we are over-consuming, or many people would say we are over-consuming. And now in the transport field, if we indeed argue and realize an e-bike city, we might see that many more people are then expressing their status with matching e-bikes. And if you go to stores today, you can buy whatever the 500 franc e-bike you mentioned, but also the 15,000, 16,000 franc e-bike as well. I think firms will find it not difficult to make prestigious things.
Yeah, I mean, when I see somebody using an Urban Arrow, commuter bike, which I think costs like $7,000 in the US, I must admit I'm a little envious. So Professor Joe Ferreira at MIT had a question that within metro areas, densities, infrastructure vary widely and imply need for more attention to multimodal travel, since point to point in one type vehicle or mode for all will not work. And I think you alluded to this point. So how do these considerations fit into your e-bike enabled strategy? And this is similar to what you answered earlier as well, but I just wanted to touch upon his question as well.
I think, Joe, thanks for the question. It is an issue, but an e-bike has quite a long range because of the energy supplied by it. They are easily usable up to 10, 12 kilometers, which covers most of the urban trips. And yes, people who do have to travel multimodal will likely to be suburbanites, serious suburbanites, kind of living 30, 40, 50 kilometers away, well outside of the range of cycling. And there, I think we would like to continue with the reliance of mass transport, of public transport, plus first mile, last mile solutions. I would argue that it's probably mostly a first mile problem, because generally public transport gets you pretty close to your destination, so most people can walk in most conditions.
Okay. You had mentioned, social capital being one of the positive outcomes, of having the car, more interactions, more meeting new people. And I know you mentioned at the beginning that this is from an urban perspective, not from a suburban perspective. But Adam had a question that targeting demand and capping accessibility is great from an emission standpoint. But if we are not combining this with reducing urban sprawl and shrinking distances, it can mean that people interact less often, right? And which has its own health consequences due to shrinking social capital. So is the trade-off worth it? Have you all done any initial numbers, calculations?
I think what we have done is done empirical work on the spatial distribution of friendships networks. And it's not only my group, but also a couple of other groups around the world, in Eindhoven, in Tokyo, Gian Paradi, in Chile and Canada. But this work is not very widespread. So this is just maybe, 5, 6, 10 studies, and would need to replicate it elsewhere. And what we saw in these studies is that the bulk of the friends are pretty close by. It drops off exponentially. And then people have friends more or less equally distributed across the world. These are relatives, or these are friends who moved, and so on. And because accessibility improvements bring those friends closer to you, that's the argument I make for accessibility, improving social capital. Now, what happens when we go to an e-bike city is that those friends in the first round around you, this is for first 5, 10 kilometers, are still reachable by e-bike or by public transport, as may be. And therefore, I don't see a reduction. Question. Next question.
Yeah, sorry. Just
Really gross.
sorry about the disturbance. Yeah, so I'll just move on to the next question then. So I wanted to touch upon the road space. You showed that really nice video on the changing of the roadway, and so we are very limited with our urban road space. We have bus lanes, bus stops, on-street parking, bike lanes, pedestrian walkways. So how do we balance it? It's like a very fine line, and of course, car lanes as well. You take away on-street parking. There's a huge uproar by the shops who own the real estate there. You take away, you add a bus rapid transit lane, you take away a car lane. They say, oh, traffic congestion is getting worse. You add a bike lane, but you do not add drop-off points. Then you have Ubers and food delivery cars parking on the bike lane, and the bike lane is pretty much very unsafe. So how do you look at this from an urban perspective?
Maybe we are spoiled because we are looking at it from a Swiss perspective, and we haven't looked at other cities. And I would be really interested to see the use of our tools, because one of the PhD students, Lucas Ballo, has developed a GIS-based tool to help planners to plan for the e-bike city, including, for example, software to plan for the needed parking spaces, which are still required. And yes, we will have these conflicts, but as today, because the fight for the curb is ongoing, and there's certainly in the US a very active discussion about optimal use of the curb. And in this case, we have to take the position, yes, there will be change, and we will have to live with it. And clearly, when you talk about the shopkeepers and maybe some landlords which are farming out their parking needs onto the public domain, they will have to adapt, just as they adapt to e-commerce. And we will have to see how they are currently surviving and will continue to thrive, and how they integrate that with a reduction of on-street parking. And particularly in dense urban areas, surprisingly amount of their customers come on foot.
Right. Yeah.
That's true. Thank you so much.
Sure. Sorry to interrupt. It's at the time now. Thank you, Kai, for offering the presentation, this alternative vision. And so the conversation is really lively there. Yeah, everybody, please join me. Thank Professor Kai Axhausen for the conversation today. It's really amazing.
Thank you very much.
Since this is the last session of the season, let me recap a bit that so this is actually the 134th round of the MIT Mobility Forum, and we're welcome you to go through them, look at all the prior presentations and topics. I will give you the link in a second there. But mostly, Bhuvan, John Monzati, and myself have a request to everyone, which is we'd like to get your recommendations on future talks, speakers, topics, panels on this, so that we can really cross-source the future seasons of the MIT Mobility Forum. And so today will be the last one for this season. We'll start in February 2025 for the spring season there as well. And also a quick announcement that during TRB, we'll have the MIT TRB reception is on Tuesday, 6 p.m. At the same restaurant. We'll send out the invitation in the email as well. So thank you everybody for joining and supporting the Mobility Forum. Hope you all have a great holiday season coming at you, and a Happy New Year, everybody. Bye-bye, see you next